in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Devos Outdoor, your go-to source for lightweight, portable, and versatile lighting solutions built for the outdoors and beyond. Whether you need scene lighting for public safety emergencies or reliable area lighting for your campsite, Devos has you covered. Their LED lanterns offer variable outputs and color options with Bluetooth remote controls that provide a complete ecosystem of lighting in a compact and easy-to-deploy package. These lights are perfect for camping, hunting, search and rescue, crime scene processing, and nighttime operations. Devos optimizes your experience and alleviates your pain points with extra power banks, solar panels, and more. Devos Outdoor ensures that you have long-lasting portable lighting no matter where you are. Check out their lineup at Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com or find them on Amazon. Again, that's Devos, D-E-V-O-S, outdoor.com. This episode was also brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
I recently got to do a ride along with Mike, which is always fascinating. We got to watch the local fire department Narcan a guy, and they just gave him a bottle of water and sent him on his way. That's kind of neat. And that led us into an interesting talk about the drug war and how this evolved. And once again, we'd like to congratulate drugs for its victory in the drug war. And it is important, though, to understand that it has evolved. It has shifted pretty distinctly, like in the last 5 or 10 years. And I don't know exactly when, and when it shifted changes depending on where in the country you're looking, I'm pretty sure. But it's changed a lot. And the two big drivers from where I sit are the decriminalization of marijuana and the massive proliferation of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. So it looks, at least to my eye and to the data available to me, like the street violence related to drugs has gone way down. So that's a good thing. We like that. Like when people are shooting each other less. And part of that, as far as I can tell, is fentanyl is so easy to get and make that it just, I guess, isn't worth fighting over.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's super cheap. It's a synthetic, and you don't, in terms of, it's not like marijuana that you had to grow and harvest, and it was a crop, and there was a season, and all those things. So the fentanyl does change things on the supply side of it. And the violence is still there. There are still people fighting over, their whoever owes them money, drug debt type things, but it is a lot cheaper, and it's incredibly cheap to get. I mean, you're talking a few dollars to get several doses of fentanyl, 3 for $5 kind of thing, right? Like it's nothing. The other thing, though, that kind of affects that is the level of addiction. Like the people that need that need it, right? And so the demand is really, really high compared to like what marijuana was. But a lot of the violence that we saw when the marijuana trade was really big was like bales of marijuana. You'd have crews that were going and ripping people off. And it's hard to hide 400 pounds or 2,000 pounds of marijuana packaged in bales. And so that level of violence that you saw with these like home invasion rip crews and stuff like that was like a whole different game, right? You'd have these groups of 4 or 5 dudes that were very organized and would go in and rip these stash houses because you can't hide that much product very easily, right? Fentanyl's different, right? Like a backpack of fentanyl is a lot of fentanyl. So the violence is still there. It's still problematic, but it does look different. And I think when you couple that, or I guess compare it against just there's the doper, the dealer on dealer or the drug debts, right? Somewhere in that supply chain, there's always like kind of this guy owes me money or whatever. On the wholesale side, it's a lot cheaper. And so it's easier to kind of like let it roll off your shoulders perhaps than it was with marijuana. But the other side of it too was, like I said, just the volume, like the volume of fentanyl. A trash bag full of fentanyl can come across the border, and I mean, you're talking, you could make a lot of money off of that. So people kind of just, it's not that, they cut their losses, I think, a little bit in terms of like wanting to deal with the drama. And so that does change things. But again, where I was going with that a second ago is you have to contrast that with the number of people getting killed by overdosing on this stuff.
Yeah, so the lethality has gone way, way up with specifically the opioids. And you can see it in basically every city in the U.S. If you pass a bus stop, there'll be at least somebody hunched over like a zombie. And Mike was explaining to me, like, their nervous system is so suppressed that they kind of can't hold their heads up.
Yeah.
Like their blood pressure's dropping, that kind of thing.
On the nod, yep.
And in 2023, which is the most recent year I could find data for, 105,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. Now, that's almost twice as many as we lost in all of Vietnam. And politically and culturally, we kind of struggle with that because, it's a free country and drugs are kind of a victimless crime, except when they're not. And lots of people do drugs and don't die, except for the people who do. But we as a country are set up assuming that everyone is basically rational, which is why we're so laissez-faire about a lot of things. The problem with drugs and drug addiction is it tends to make people incapable of rational decision-making. And therein lies the rub, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of angles on this. I mean, from a community standpoint, if you've got a house that's serving dope, right, and these addicts need their fix, right, it just attracts. It's like flies on shit or moths to a flame or whatever. And so you've got this like dope house that people are serving out of, and people will be crashing out there on couches, turned into flop houses. People are using there. They're, it attracts all kinds of drama. And so other people in that neighborhood it becomes an eyesore at best, and it brings other drama with it at worst. Because a lot of times these addicts will resort to, burglaries and things that they'll go steal stuff that they can trade to supply their habit. And so those neighborhoods affected by it end up with a lot of just collateral drama, right?
And the other side of just all the misery that comes with getting your car broken into.
Well, right. And on top of that, like you've got these next door neighbors, like these people that aren't doing so great in life and making the best, like you said, rational choices. And now they're kind of infesting your neighborhood at all hours of the day and night. And that can be disruptive, again, at best, right? Like it could be a nuisance at best. The other side of it is like the empath in me wants to acknowledge that although those individuals, it's a free country and whatever, and those individuals are making their own choices, like you could put whatever you want in your body. Yeah, that's fine. But a lot of people have loved ones and have lost someone close to them to an overdose. And the people affected by it on that end, because they see that addiction is such a big problem and that so many people are being affected by it, that there's this urge or this push to do something about it. And yes, the user gets a vote 100%, right? But the people who lose their loved ones over this don't want to see other people fall victim to that. And so there's this big push for it. But the problem is the people affected by it, the people engaging in the drug use itself, the user and the dealers and all of that, and then the people who are doing the some things that everyone wants them to do, those things don't always align. And that becomes this big puzzle, right, of like conflicting kind of values and incompatible, fixes to the problem. So these days, in a lot of major cities, there are a lot of treatment options, and there's a lot of money poured into stuff like that if someone wants to go get help. And a lot of times, the people just don't want it. Like, they're like, no, I'm good. I'd rather not. Like, rehab's miserable. It sucks. Yeah. They're going to withdraw. They're going to go through all these things, and like they'd rather just keep living their life. And you give them that as an alternative to jail. There's a lot of alternatives to jail. But again, it's like, well, you give them the option of do that or go to jail, they'll take it for the night, but then they're like, all right, F this. Like, I'd rather go back to doing what I was doing, right? Hang out with my friends and smoke my dope.
Be high, yeah.
The other issue is, again, going back to that lethality thing, is the research, and don't quote me on the exact numbers on here, but it's something like it takes like at least 7 times going back to rehab before people start to finally, and that's just an average. For some people, it's a lot more, and maybe for some people it's less, but there's a lot of opportunities to overdose and die in there. And that's also part of the problem is, again, going back to lethality. This isn't just a drinking problem, which is like a chronic long-term disease. It only takes one to overdose and it'll kill you. Right.
Yeah. So what do we do about it? Right. And Tactical Tangents is not a political podcast. I don't necessarily have a position on this. I'm a big believer in being left alone, but like I said, like that assumes everyone's being rational, and that's not necessarily true when we're talking about addictions. And as far as policy and fighting, there was this guy named Clausewitz, kind of a Sun Tzu type dude for Prussia, and he said, war is politics by other means, and the corollary to that is politics is war by other means. It's just kind of same, but different, right? So when we consider the policies that are in place right now, we've got a whole spectrum of policies. We're seeing all kinds of what I will call innovative policies to try to help fix it. On one side of the spectrum, at the extremes, you have what I would describe as fatal compassion, where some cities are providing safe places and Narcan and needle exchanges to help these addicts die slowly with dignity. And then on the other hand, you have some recent federal initiatives to go, let's call it the extreme other way, right? And so as we record this episode, we are hearing reports, officially the President of the United States and the Department of, I think we're calling it War this week, has released that the United States Navy has sent something like 69 ships to the Caribbean Sea. And the president announced that we did a drone strike against a group of narco-terrorists on a go-fast vessel in international waters.
11
That's
KIA.
exciting. Yeah, that's exciting times.
That's one way to address the problem. You just blow them up.
Yeah, so, war on drugs might be taking a turn, I would say. So I was talking about this with a bro.
Imagine real quick being the guy that's like, hey, we need you to get on a boat. Go take this to Miami. Like,
I'm up at my rates, right?
Yeah.
We just changed the economy of this, right? So I was talking about this with a bro, and I mentioned like that one time we invaded Panama, and he looked at me like I had a dick growing out of my head. He'd never heard of it. Turns out I'm old. And it turns out even for people who are my age, not every 8-year-old was watching CNN like I was in 1989. But here we are.
Yeah. So how does Panama relate to the war on drugs, Jim?
Well, that was
why Panama?
Yeah, that was one battle in the war on drugs, and it was kind of at a I don't know if I call it a watershed or tipping point, but like things happened, and it was couched in the context of the drug war. So I want to do some scene setting for you on the American invasion of Panama in 1989.
Operation Just Cause, right?
Just cause, or just because, depending on what side of the political spectrum you're from. Just cause, right? So, little scene setting. Let's go back to 1823. We, America, have claimed some, I'll call it authority in the Americas since the Monroe Doctrine. Oh dear. Oh, history class. Okay. So the Monroe Doctrine is one of those things you probably saw in a history textbook, maybe took a test on when you're like 15, and then you probably never thought about it again. Don't worry, neither have I. Well, let me refresh you. Back in 1823, the 5th president of the United States, James Monroe, hence the Monroe Doctrine, announced this doctrine, and it was written by John Quincy Adams, who was like the 4th or 5th president of the United States, fourth, I guess. And the whole point of the doctrine was like, Europe can do whatever it wants over in Europe, but we would like to see a lot less European colonization in the Americas. We're in charge over here. You Europeans go be in charge everywhere that's not here, North and South America.
Kind of drew a line down the middle. My side, your side.
Down the Atlantic and down the Pacific, right? And the Europeans, they had their own drama, and so they didn't challenge it too hard, and so it kind of became precedent a little bit. And presidents have leaned on that Monroe Doctrine as kind of a precedent ever since. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt leaned way into it when he used phrases like, we're going to walk softly and carry a big stick. He was talking about the Caribbean and debt in the Caribbean. And he claimed the U.S. has a right to intervene, in his words, in cases of flagrant and chronic wrongdoing by a Latin American nation. That the U.S. has a right to intervene.
Just like we claimed the authority over the Americas.
Yeah.
Just because we said so.
Yeah, it's like from The Office, like I didn't say it, I declared it.
Yeah.
And the cool part when you're a superpower is you get to do that a little bit, right, before you lose credibility. So, take a second and imagine you are a Latin American nation. How do you interpret that message? Like, thanks, Big Daddy. Like... Yeah, really going to enjoy this. So the Monroe Doctrine evolved over the years, and as American politics shifted left and right and left and right and left and right over the years, got more or less rejected and reaffirmed and rejected and reaffirmed. And in 1933, we helped create the Organization of American States, which is sort of like a UN for the Americas. Okay, so in one part of this story, you need to know there is a such thing called the Monroe Doctrine, and that we claim some right of intervention in the Americas. Cool. That's thing one.
Backed and supported by ourselves.
Force of arms, the big stick.
Yeah.
Right? Next, you need to know that there's a canal that runs across Panama, and it's kind of a big deal. We built it. Originally, the French tried. It didn't work. We took it over. Teddy Roosevelt was a big part of this. And at the time, it was one of the biggest, most expensive, most dangerous projects ever in world history to be undertaken, right? And it is one of the critical pieces of global trade infrastructure to this day that makes the entire global economy work, right? The fact that you can go to a Walmart and buy a t-shirt is partly because the Panama Canal exists, right? The fact that you can put oil in your car or gas in your car is partly because the Panama Canal exists. And we owned and we ran the canal zone until 1999, when we handed control of the zone back to Panama, and that was based on a treaty that Jimmy Carter signed back in 1977. So now we've bounced from 1823 to 1999 to 1977. You still with me? Good, cool. Okay.
Write that down. Jot that down.
Now, yeah, and consider with the Panama Canal, like most of the big ships you see look the way they do and are sized the way they are because they have to fit in the specs for the Panama Canal locks. It's called the Panamax spec. And to give you a sense of scale for how much of our economy moves through it, in the year 2015, which is the last year I could find stats for, 340 million tons of cargo, a good chunk of it was probably drugs, moved through the Panama Canal, which is like a lot, right? 340 million tons. So, as it relates to the canal, we claim at least some symbolic ownership over the zone to this day. And in 1989, we 100% actually legally owned the canal, and we owned the territory right up alongside it, the canal zone, right? And along with owning that territory, we still had a pretty intensive military presence there. There was not just one military base, there were like several throughout the canal zone. Okay, so that's thing two, Panama Canal, big deal. Thing three, the war on drugs. So 1980s, some of you weren't born then, that's cool. The first lady of the United States with Ronald Reagan was Nancy Reagan, bless her heart. And she said, just say no. And that apparently started the war on drugs as we know it. And that was a reflection of the fact that there was growing inner city violence associated with the drug trade. And they were starting to see like the decay that goes with drug use and drug addiction across the United States. It's nasty, right? So increasingly, politicians wanted to take a hardline stance on drugs, and they kept using phrases like war on drugs. It's not the first time we've used terms like that. If you think back to high school history classes, there was like a war on poverty and a war on deforestation and a war on whatever the hell else. And war on drugs is just one more thing, because anytime we declare a war, we get to say that we're doing something, right? So to understand national illicit drug policy, and I guess that could be its own show with maybe experts who are smarter than we are on policy, but you got to understand it a little to understand where we're going with this Panama thing, right? You have to understand drugs through an economic lens, and especially the main illicit drugs of the time, right? Cocaine, marijuana, things like that. They are a commodity, and specifically they're an agricultural commodity. Mike mentioned earlier that like there's a growing season. Like that's a big deal when we're talking about marijuana and cocaine. And there are two sides of the economic equation. There's the supply side, which is the growers, the processors, the shippers, the distributors, the dealers. And then you have the demand side of the equation, which are the buyers and the users. And if you want to make a dent in it, you've got to monkey with the economics of it, right? So say you're a politician in Washington, D.C., and you promise the American people you're going to make a dent in it. You got to sever the supply and the demand, right? Well, if you look at arrows drawn on a map between where the drugs come from in South America and where the drugs are used in North America, you see an arrow going from south to north, and you're like, I'm going to cut it, right? And the obvious
choke point.
Yeah, the obvious choke point is this skinny little chunk of land that connects North and South America, which is the isthmus. Ooh, we're all about that little high school words today. Country of Panama. Panama is an isthmus. So for just a minute, ignore the air and the sea routes. If you're just drawing lines and arrows on a map, that looks like a really compelling case. Let's cut the line there, okay? So those are like the three basic concepts you need to know walking into this. Is like Monroe Doctrine, Panama Canal, war on drugs. Cool. So Panama at the time, and it's largely still a very, very, very poor country, but it's a proud country and internationally relevant because of the canal. And at the time it was kind of democratic throughout the 80s. And we kept it democratic and we made sure that who we wanted was getting elected, like this Noriega guy who at various times was on our payroll. And Noriega would sometimes play ball with us. That was his name, Noriega, Manuel Noriega. Various times he was on the payroll. Sometimes he wouldn't play ball with us. He was kind of playing us against Russia, against the cartels. And over his time as the president of Panama, he got more and more authoritarian, and he got more and more dictatorial, and he was kind of scaring people away from the voting places, and he had goon squads and secret police kidnapping and torturing his political rivals. Nice guy, right? And at some point, President Reagan in the late 80s was like, I'm kind of done dealing with this dude. He's no longer a friend. And that got pretty clear when the United States indicted Noriega on drug charges in February of 1988. That's when you could tell, like, the political climate in D.C. had shifted, and we were no longer interested in having Noriega be the guy in charge in Panama. Coincidentally, that is when U.S. forces started working on operational plans in case they needed to reset Panama. So the next president was a guy named George Herbert Walker Bush, George H.W. Bush, who coincidentally had been the director of Central Intelligence. He had been the director of the CIA before he was vice president.
I want to jump in real quick on something, just back up a second, because I want to make sure that we emphasize a little bit about the playing both sides thing, right? And this is one of those, like, you got to keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Yeah.
Like, Panama was important to us. We needed influence there. And so we had this guy that was kind of like, okay, like, I don't like him, I don't trust him, but we'll work with him, right?
He was an asshole, but he was our asshole. That's a recurring theme, right?
Right. And it's kind of like you have the carrot and the stick kind of thing, right? Where you're like, we could work with this dude, but like on the sidelines, we also know that, yeah, but this freaking guy is also running one of these cartels. It's sending a bunch of stuff our way. And so when we talk about playing both sides, it's kind of like in his mind, he's pulling a fast one, right? Like he's just like, oh, these guys are giving us money and resources and stuff, so I'm just going to keep playing nice with them. But like he's still doing his thing, and like we're not dumb, right? And so I think that's some of where, in terms of a relationship, like you see that with political adversaries of countries that are not necessarily like allies, but not quite enemies, or somewhere like, you got to work with them a little bit. And so I think that's a key point in this, and understanding that like we knew this guy was shady, but we also needed his cooperation to the extent that we could get it. And at some point when he started to get more and more sketch, it was like, all right, this guy's getting kind of out of control and we're going to have to intervene here. Right. I think that's like an important thing to maybe wrap your head around, that this is not just perhaps one perspective, the U.S. like throwing its weight around like, we don't like that guy, he's not doing it. It's like, well, there's a little bit more to it than that, right? I would like to think, at least.
I think that's a good way of putting it, right? So bear in mind, in the 80s, like our big 800-pound gorilla threat was the Soviet Union. And so we were looking for people that would help us against communists, and communism was a growing issue in Latin America and Nicaragua and the Contras and all that stuff. So, and
you have that Panama Canal thing, which is a strategic, I mean, there's the economy side of it, right? But there's also other strategic implications of that thing.
Yeah, we really didn't want to see Panama go communist, right? That would have been a red line, I'm pretty sure, for us because of the canal zone, right? And he was relatively non-communist. In fact, he was all about the capitalism. He was all about the capitalism of the drugs. And I don't think he was necessarily running a cartel, but I think he was on their payroll too. And so they were paying him to kind of look the other way and help the flow, right? So at some point, like I said, Reagan was like, yeah, I'm done with this guy, but didn't want to do anything overt because he was going into the next election where George H.W. Bush was going to get elected, right? So George H.W. Bush, who happened to have previously been the director of Central Intelligence, was like, yeah, that guy's done. Okay. And you know you're done when we put a bounty on your head as the president of a foreign country. That's when, like, the United States has made its point clear.
You'll notice some patterns in this story and episode.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it does tend to rhyme, I would tell you. So, about that time, we, America, were trying to do more and more things to kind of undermine Noriega and to try to help a new government democratically take form, right? Among other things, there was an American living in Panama named Kurt Muse. And maybe with a little help from Uncle Sam, Kurt Muse was running a pirate radio station that was actively undermining Noriega and encouraging people to vote him out of office and pointing out how bad of a dictator he was. So you can imagine the dictator, Noriega, didn't love that and had Kurt Muse arrested and threw him in the Modelo prison. Off you go, prison. Straight to jail. And there was an election, which Noriega lost, but he was the dictator. He's like, well, maybe there's an election, maybe there wasn't. I'm still the guy in charge, right? So he threw out the results of the election. And then there was at least one or two or maybe three attempts to like do a coup to like overthrow Noriega. And he was pretty savvy and handled all of those, took the guys out and shot them. But he was catching wind that we were doing it. Like we were actively trying to get him out. And so on the 15th of December, 1989, he declared war on the United States.
It's cute.
Let me know how that works out for you. So the next night, the 16th of December, 1989, a group of U.S. soldiers and Marines in the Canal Zone, remember we had several bases in and around the Canal Zone, they were stopped at a Panamanian checkpoint. And the Panamanian military was called the PDF. You'll hear me use that term, Panamanian Defense Forces, right? So they were stopped at a PDF checkpoint. They were harassed. They tried to flee. a Marine lieutenant was shot and killed at that checkpoint.
It's a real good way to piss America off.
Oh, yeah. And there were American witnesses, among other things, a Navy officer. I saw mixed reporting what exactly his status was. Maybe he was a Navy SEAL. And his wife were arrested. He was beaten, and they threatened to rape his wife. That's when you can tell, like, relations are souring, right?
Again, let me know how that works out for you.
Coincidentally, that same night, President George H. Yeah, a lot of coincidences here. President George H.W. Bush set H hour for the invasion. 0100 local on 20 December. So things were moving pretty fast.
You got the weekend, boys.
Yeah. So according to Wikipedia, which is where I derived a lot of this from, just because it's efficient, right? And it sounds about right. The invasion force had something like 27 distinct objectives they were going after. And so there were a bunch of different task forces that we sent in to all do their hits, more or less in parallel, on 20th of December, H hour, right? So there were a lot of things they needed to knock out, and they wanted to do it all right away. They wanted to grab Noriega for sure. They wanted to seize critical infrastructure and airfields. They absolutely wanted to control the canal zone. They wanted to rescue Kurt Muse. And protect and install the legitimate Panamanian government, right? That's the stuff they were going after. So they were trying to do a bunch of things all at once. They had a bunch of different units doing all of those tasks. And so they had task forces. There's a task force red, task force black, task force ranger, task force bayonet, task force sleepy weasel, whatever. There was a bunch of them, right? And each one of them had their mission set. So the first one, they wanted to grab Noriega. That was pretty high on the list. One of the problems going into that part of the mission was we didn't have a great fix on Noriega's precise location going in.
Yeah, that's problematic. I think we do a lot of manhunting type of operations in my world, and not to this scale. We're not invading countries, but I can speak to at least the importance of finding your guy, which is often the hardest and most time consuming, especially if they're on the run and they know they're being sought after, like they know they're a target, right? So there's sort of that process. You have to find them, fix them, and then you could finish them, whatever that looks like, capture, kill, arrest, whatever, right? But that element of it is often the hardest and most time consuming part of it, because especially if they know that they're a target, right? They're going to do a good job of covering their tracks and staying under the radar. So that's tricky, especially if you're put on that kind of timeline of you got the weekend, basically.
Yeah. So when you don't have a precise location, one of the basic ways you do this was called cordon and search, right? And so the way they were going to cordon this dude was they were going to cut off his escape routes. So we sent, among other things, SEALs to disable his airplane, because we didn't want him flying off into the sunset, right? So we're going to go after his airplane and we're going to sink his ship. I don't know what we were going to do to his car, but it probably wasn't nice either, right? So,
and was that the only plane and the only boat he could use is my question.
Yeah, there were some rubs with that, right? So the effort to disable the airplane is now what's called the Paitilla, Paitilla Airfield Raid, or the Battle of Paitilla Airfield. It didn't go well, and I'll give you the kind of the bottom line up front. We lost 4 SEALs, okay, and we had several more injured. Noriega managed to evade capture for about 5 days, and he ended up finding sanctuary with the Vatican in the Vatican Embassy. We'll come back to that in a second. So let's talk about the Paitilla Airfield Raid. Now, typically, if you're going to take an airfield, if you're going to do a joint forcible entry into an airfield, you use Rangers for that. That's like what they are purpose-built to do, is take airfields. That was not the intent on this. The point was not to take the airfield. The point was to disable the plane, right? So this was intended to be quieter. And there's some debate about how it went down. I've seen different reports on it. But the instructions were passed kind of late in the game, and the commander's intent was somewhat unclear. I believe that at first the SEALs were supposed to shoot up the plane, or like blow it up from a distance. Well, that's not that hard. You get within, 1,000 yards, take a shot at it, put a hole in it. It's pretty well done, right? At some point, the SEALs got kind of re-missioned to just quietly disable it, like just slash the tires or get up close to it and like cut the control cables. That is a distinctly different mission, and that required them to get a lot closer to the airplane. Now, the SEALs had overwatch from a couple of observation points. It was actually a pretty large formation of SEALs. There were several platoons kind of moving around in this airfield. And one of the problems with airfields like this is there were a lot of planes that were used in drug trafficking on that airfield. And they had guards in addition to the PDF, the Panamanian Defense Force guards. And at some point, they were compromised. And so the PDF was approaching in armored trucks. Well, the SEALs went to move to deal with the armored trucks. They were going to set up kind of a hasty ambush. They ended up in a firefight. And again, ended up with 4 KIA and 9 wounded. And then they ended up shooting up Noriega's airplane with an AT-4 rocket launcher. So commander's intent met. That thing wasn't flying.
Yeah. Blow up the plane. Check.
Yeah. They also went to put mines up against the boat. They were also compromised while doing that. The Panamanians sort of like throwing grenades at them into the water, which sounds very unpleasant, but the SEALs ended up surviving that, and I think they ended up blowing the boat, so to speak. So that was part of the effort to at least isolate him. It isn't clear to me how Noriega evaded capture night one, other than they just didn't know where he was, right? So what I hear is they didn't have a good fix. According to the official military history, which we're going to link to in the show notes, when U.S. forces were searching Noriega's house, they were doing the sensitive site exploitation, and this is what the Army found, according to the official report. 50 kilograms of white powder, initially believed to be cocaine, but later identified as a cooking ingredient. Damn.
Good catch. What a bust.
They also found pictures of Hitler, an extensive pornography collection, $83,000 in cash, a quote-unquote witch's diary chronicling visits by 2 witches from Brazil who periodically flew to Panama to provide Noriega with opportunities to practice black magic. Later that day, Special Operations Forces searched another Noriega residence where they discovered approximately $8 million and a valuable art collection. They also found a briefcase with a list of bank accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. $200,000 more in cash, personal wallet, his glasses, and 3 diplomatic passports. But they didn't find Noriega. Where Noriega found himself 5 days later was at the Vatican, the Holy See, their embassy facility in Panama. He kind of just knocked on the door and was like, "Hey, I'd like to hang out here.
Can I find Jesus?
I found Jesus. I need your help." And they took him in, right? Doing the Christian thing, take him in.
Catholic.
So he got some temporary asylum in the embassy.
The Catholic thing, I think you meant.
Yeah. So U.S. forces surrounded the embassy and blasted it with rock music. That's right, full-on Waco style. Apparently that was the style of the time, was anytime we're in a standoff, we're going to blast you with rock music. And that got lampooned in the media pretty much immediately. But, you know, like, I can appreciate the dilemma U.S. forces were in. We weren't going to shoot up the Vatican Embassy. That's bad optics. But we also couldn't let the guy go, and we weren't going to go away either. So assault was out of the question. Tear gas was probably out of the question. So what they were left with was AC/DC, Van Halen, and I kid you not, what might be the first historical use of Rickrolling, because they blasted him with Never Gonna Give You Up by Rick Astley. Like, this is maybe the key Easter egg of this whole podcast, is that we Rickrolled Noriega. I love that. So after 3 days of that, the Vatican called the President of the United States. It was like, please turn off the goddamn music. So they did. And eventually there was one month. Yeah. Could you knock that off? That'd be great. So eventually there was like one Monsignor who had like established some rapport with Noriega inside the embassy, and he kind of coaxed Noriega out. kind of talked them into surrendering, right? And there's a lesson there. We've seen this in a couple different cases where there have been standoffs, is sometimes a quote unquote neutral third party can help a lot.
Yeah, this is like classic barricaded bad guy, like bad guy in a box, right? Barricaded criminal offender type tactics. You put the bad guy in a box, and one, you limit his alternatives. Like, he's got nowhere to go. He's not, so time's on our side. And the classics are like time, talk, tear gas, and tactics, right? So third-party intermediaries are something that we use often, and something you have to think about when people are on the run and they feel trapped, right? They're in survival mode, fight or flight, right? The emotions are high, and rational thoughts are thwarted by survival-oriented behaviors. So any efforts that we can take to reduce the level of emotions and increase the level of rationality often bring us towards resolution. And so third-party intermediaries, one thing when they're in an emotionally charged state can be bringing in someone who might be able to get through to them. And so we'll use that even like barricaded criminal, that we might use or like a hostage taker type of thing. We might use friends or family members or coworkers or someone who we know has some rapport with the person to try to involve them in that process, right? So third-party intermediaries is a real thing that we do on the criminal justice side of things as well, and you could see that here with the guy from the embassy. Agitation, same sorts of things. You start to send a message that like you're not in control of this situation, right? So the music is one thing. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times throwing a flashbang and breaking a window or a front door like sends that message of like, we're here, like you're not controlling what's going to happen next, and we're going to keep taking steps, right? And again, it all comes down to limiting their options. And I think after a few days where you have this dude from the embassy that's like, hey man, like I don't think the situation's going to get much better. Like at some point these guys are going to get tired and sick of waiting. But those are tactics that absolutely apply, and it's interesting to see them applied by U.S. Special Operations Forces in 1989, because that is very much a SWAT-style resolution to bad guy in a box.
I believe that one of the options that was on the table was the Vatican guys had talked about just getting up and leaving and establishing a new embassy somewhere and leaving the building he was in as
no longer the embassy.
Yeah, the former embassy of the Vatican. So lots going on, right? There was the raid on Paitilla airfield. There were also the formal seizure of the big airports. Two big airports, Torrijos Airport and Rio Hato. We use Rangers to seize airfields. That's like what they do. So we sent a total of 1,300 Rangers, followed by 2,700 82nd Airborne dudes, and they were going to do an airborne assault into those fields and take them over and get control of them, right? So the planes, there was one group of planes that was supposed to launch at a Pope Field in North Carolina, and due to an ice storm, which doesn't happen there very often, a number of those planes got delayed for de-icing. So a relatively warm weather place doesn't have a whole lot of de-icing trucks. Shit happens with weather. That's a thing you should know. So North Carolina doesn't have a whole lot of de-icing capacity on hand. The weather gets you. I think Sun Tzu said that. The weather will get you. So the jump planes ended up launching in batches, and they arrived in batches spread out over like 4 hours. And separately, 15 C-130s full of Rangers flew from Fort Benning, Georgia, on a 7-hour flight. And you can imagine you're all rigged up to combat jumps. You got all your stuff. There isn't much of a bathroom in the back of a C-130, and it's a 7-hour flight. Good luck with your hydration. Okay.
Yeah, and when you hit the ground, that's actually, the hydration thing is a good point.
Yeah.
When you hit the ground, you're going to be running and gunning and carrying a bunch of shit.
Right? So 2 airfields both hit at HOW, right? There's Torrijos, which is a dual-use airfield. And when I say dual-use, there's a military side and a civil airport side, which is a fairly common thing you see at airports around the world. So Rangers jumped in, supported by AC-130 gunships and AH-6 Little Bird, which are the attack version of the Little Bird. Intelligence indicated that at 1 a.m., which is H hour, the airport would be pretty quiet, right? You picture a typical airport at 1 a.m. It's pretty dead. So naturally, there were 2 international flights that had just landed, and there were like 400 civilians walking around the terminal when they landed. Whoops.
Yeah. So this is a discussion that I've brought up and adapted. Probably, I'm sure I stole portions of it, but it's something that I give a lot when I talk about some of the surveillance support type of operations that we do, where we do some of this manhunting stuff, right? And we're looking at operational planning and intelligence and decision making. And one of the things that comes up a lot in terms of friction points is you want to take some time to consider what are the internal factors that we can control and what are the external factors. So let's say I'm working with another team or another agency or task force or a unit that we're supporting, right? How well they understand our needs and we understand their needs are things that we can work out, right? How well my team works, how we operate. Like if we're going to go do an assault, when I open those doors or when I set that breach is up to me, right? Or well, not me typically, but it's up to us, right? It's up to the team to decide, hey, we're going to do the thing or we're going to wait and be patient and have some discipline, right? Those are all internal kinks that we can work out on our side of it. And then there's the external stuff. There's things that we can't control. The weather is a great example of that. Traffic conditions, lighting, where the bad guy goes, like where is he going to run? I could make educated guesses. I could try to channel him a certain way, but there's a lot of external stuff like he gets a vote, right? And so you have to delineate the things that you can control and the things that you can't. And I think this is a good example because whenever I talk about operational planning, when we do these sorts of things, on the internal stuff, you have a responsibility to iron all of that out as best you can so that when the stuff happens that you can't control comes up, you can deal with it. And in my world, that might look like I've literally had this example happen where we're about to do a takedown and like school buses pull into the parking lot. And it's, school children or, nuns or whatever getting off the bus and you're like, abort. We're not doing it here. We're going to wait for the next opportunity because this is not the time or the place anymore. It was, but not anymore. And what are you going to do? You're jumping into an airfield and there's a bunch of civilians there. That's problematic. And so all you can do in your planning for that is the what if game, right? Well, what if we get there and X happens and have some sort of contingency for it? But on the tactical side of it or the operational planning side of things, I think that's something that you need to take some time to consider. This is a perfect example. There are things you can control and things you can't. People being there you didn't expect, you can't really control it.
So Torrijos, otherwise, it went pretty smoothly, although there were a number of parachute-related injuries. I haven't seen the total number, but it was noticeable. I believe that these combat jumps were done at 500 feet, so they were done lower than you would typically train at. Rio Hato Airport was tougher, and it was right next to a PDF, Panamanian Defense Force Army barracks. So there was supposed to be an airstrike right next to the barracks. They weren't going for lethality. They were trying to just stun them. But it literally just ended up waking everybody up and alerting them. Whoops. So at H hour, the PDF had anti-aircraft guns, armored vehicles, and small arms fire there to greet the Rangers because they'd literally just been woken up by an airstrike. The Rangers, fortunately, had an AC-130 gunship. That helps. And I want to sidebar us real quick. Admiral McRaven, he was a recent SOCOM commander. He wrote a book called Spec Ops. He wrote that book when he was a SEAL team commander. The dude literally wrote the book on Spec Ops, okay? He is also the guy who, he was famous because he said, if you want to rule the world, you got to make your bed in the morning. He was that guy. So in his book, the one about Spec Ops, not the one about making your bed, he talked about the window of vulnerability that special operations faces. So like special ops teams, usually small teams. They're always outnumbered, but they're safe as long as their presence isn't known. As soon as they're compromised, that's when they're vulnerable. So like, well, duh, but there's some meaning there, right? Like, I can keep you safe right up until the bad guys know you're there. Then I got to do something extra to protect you.
Yeah, so this is another adaptation that law enforcement has stolen from special operations, and there's other books that have been written about these sorts of things. I would check out books by Charlie Beckwith, for example. But one of the doctrines in special operations that they talk a lot about is speed, surprise, and violence of action. And law enforcement SWAT teams have stolen this, particularly as it relates to hostage rescue being kind of the quintessential big one, speed, surprise, and violence of action. It translated well into doing like narcotics drug raids, right? Especially no-knock search warrants, which is not so much of a thing these days. We've gotten smarter about how to handle those. But it still is a thing when it comes to doing these unmarked, covert surveillance type of operations that end in apprehensions, right? And I think the politically correct... Someone somewhere didn't like the term violence of action because it suggested that we were going out to do violence. And so we called it, what was it? Someone made it up. Overwhelming action, whatever. But the point is that element of surprise is a big part of it. And if you lose that element of surprise, you're less effective, right? And that's something that we stole from these guys that were doing the special ops thing in the 80s or whatever, and those books were getting written about this kind of thing. Speed, surprise, violence of action. You need that element of surprise to stay safe. And particularly like Jim is saying, they're always outnumbered, right? You operate with these like small, swift, nimble forces, and that makes you really, really good when it comes to the speed and the violence of it, but it does have a disadvantage if you're not careful. So the element of surprise is huge.
Yeah, and when you hear speed, surprise, violence of action, Air Force guys tend to think, well, that's an Army thing. That's a CQB thing. I don't need to worry about that. I just fly the plane. Well, no, operational planners, Air Force guys, need to account for that, right? Getting there isn't the dangerous part. It's sometimes the hard part, but it's not the dangerous part. The dangerous part is after things get loud. So again, a number of Rangers were injured on the jump. There was one helicopter versus Ranger fratricide incident that ended up with 2 killed and 4 wounded. The total U.S. casualties at Rio Hato were 4 killed, 18 wounded, and also 26 injured on the jump.
Ugh.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got trying to find Noriega, trying to mess with his airplane, trying to mess with his boat. We have trying to take the airports. And then we also have to rescue this American asset, an American citizen, Kurt Muse. He'd been arrested. He was being held in the Modelo prison, which was where like political prisoners were typically being held and often messed with. And Noriega, this was unwise. He had made threats that he would kill Kurt if there was an American attack. Well, at that point, he's not a prisoner, he's a hostage. And at that point, that's not a diplomatic thing, that's a military thing.
And the U.S. takes real well to threats, so...
Yeah. Especially from, Latin American cheese balls.
From that little guy.
Yeah. So, U.S. Army Special Operations Forces conducted a helicopter assault force half raid on the prison. Their main helicopters at that point were MH-6 Little Bird helicopters. And we've mentioned Little Birds in previous episodes. They're cool. They're one of the coolest aircrafts in the world. Oh, yeah. They started out as souped up MD-500s, which is sort of like a little police helicopter or the Magnum PI helicopter. Also, you've seen them in Black Hawk Down, that kind of thing. The Army has been flying them since forever, like for a long time. They are little, they are nimble, and the body of the helicopter is kind of egg-shaped. So it tends to, in the words of the Army guys, it tends to crash good, which is important because they take them into harm's way, right?
And one thing we know about helicopters, there's 2 types of people that fly in helicopters. Those who have been in a helicopter crash and those who are gonna.
Checks. So They land on the roof, get to Muse, goes real well. They shoot all the bad guys, grab our American. The rescue force very smartly strapped a helmet and armor onto the hostage. And then they had their precious cargo. They get them up to the roof. They leave on a little bird. The little bird takes small arms fire. And the helicopter ends up crashing into the streets. So the Army soft guys ended up strong pointing a nearby building, which means they took it over and held it.
Yep. Alamo.
Our stuff is now our stuff. And they were eventually picked up by an armored personnel carrier. So when the helicopters fail, the tank will come pick you up. That's also a thing. So that was the rescue Kurt Muse. There's a great book about it by Kurt called 6 Minutes to Freedom. I highly recommend it. We'll link to it in the show notes. And that's the cool thing. It was 6 minutes. So another thing that came up, and I haven't seen a whole lot on the internet about this, but I happen to know that it was true. There was at least one instance where we did a dual unit quick reaction force. So we paired up some Army special ops guys with conventional troops. And they were just the on-call quick reaction force. In case something got weird, they were the ones who were going to go respond to it. And the reporting I've seen on it was it worked really well. And it was one of the big risk mitigators in this very complex operation. It's like, well, if things get weird, call the QRF and they will be there and they will be able to help you, right? So we explored the space on that, pairing up soft with conventional. Every time we do that, and we do it all the time, we act like it's the first time we've ever done that. Maybe we should, I don't know, write that down, make that SOP.
I feel, augmenting special units and conventional troops is probably its own episode. And this actually is a really, I mean, I guess it's kind of soft heavy, but why is it so hard that every time we do that, it's like the first time we've done it? Part of it is just because you're putting those numbers and the geography and all those things. I mean, maybe it varies from time and place. And so you still have to give it its own attention. But that's something that on my team, we've talked a lot about is when we have to augment, let's say, our team with the regional team or our team with patrol. And we've done this more and more over the years where, if we have limited resources or smaller contingencies, maybe we have to use like patrol for containment on a problem, and we can just do like the crisis or the arrest team or the assault team type of thing, right? Or in a big like a school shooting type of thing, the active shooter, this comes up a lot. Where SWAT guys understand that this is a patrol problem, not a SWAT problem, and that means that when you show up, you might be the guy that has a little bit more training, a little bit more expertise, but you're going to have to translate or convey that in some meaningful way to the patrol guys that you're with. An example that came up recently was I had a very real potential for a hostage situation a couple weeks back. And as the only SWAT guy on scene for a few minutes, there came a moment where I go, all right, like am I most helpful with a rifle, being the first guy through the door, or with the entry tools to get the door open? Because most of these guys have never had to force a door like that, and it was a problematic door, right? And so like there's something that comes with looking at strengths and weaknesses of both forces or groups or types of people that you might have in that problem, and figuring out how you can involve and augment in a meaningful way. And synergize, right? You get the best aspects of the soft guys with the best aspects of the conventional guys. And like that is so much, there's so much nuance to that it's hard to really describe, because the way they look at a problem is completely different, perhaps, right? Like the way a soft unit, for example, we talk about having an outnumbered group that goes into, they're invading a country to go do this thing, and they're always outnumbered and outgunned in some way, and they need that speed, surprise, and violence of action to be effective. And you combine them with people that are used to massing large forces and maybe strong pointing, like having an Alamo or an area that they can take over. Like, we have completely different paradigms in our mind about how we solve problems. And so that's probably a good episode by itself, but it does take its own dedicated time to think about.
Yeah. Another thing that happened on H-Hour was we used a Special Forces team from 7th Special Forces Group, so Green Berets, to capture a critical bridge. I don't remember the name of the bridge. Doesn't matter right now. So bridges are key terrain. If you control that, you can control the flow, right? Or the flow of humans across them. That's important. But that is not a traditional SF mission, right? Special Forces guys are there to train and convince other people to fight on our behalf. They can do a bunch of other stuff. They can do direct action.
Like
that's
carry
not
out
really
a coup,
what they're
maybe?
signed for. Yeah, do a coup.
Hypothetically.
And they can be on either side of that coup, right? They can put down a coup or they can create one. So
Facilitate, yeah.
this is a recurring theme when we talk about integrating SOF in the conventional world, is often the conventional guys have the preponderance of forces, which means they have command over the operation in a lot of cases. They have joint force command. And so the SOF guys will show up and be like, hey, we want to help you. We've got all these cool tools and toys and capabilities. And the conventional guys kind of don't know how to integrate the SOF guys. And so anytime they hit like a problem, they're like, okay, SOF guys, just fix this, miracle this, right? And so the only gap conventional guys want to talk about is the wet crossing gap, as in like, how do I get across a bridge or how do I get across a river? And the SOF guys are like, you know, there's 1,000 other things we could probably also do for you, right? And that's an issue to this day. In 2025, as we record this, I've heard SOF guys say that this year. So it was ironic that in 1989, that it was exactly what they got used for. So next case, the things that happened on and around H-Hour, that was the first use of the F-117 stealth fighter, and it missed.
That's my bad.
So, yeah. So remember when I said all the guards at Rio Hato Airport were awake when the Rangers hit it? Here's the backstory. So according to the official military history, there were two F-117As. The pilots of the two F-117As flew to Rio Hato to drop one each 2,000-pound bomb, each within 150 yards of the Panamanian Defense Forces 6th and 7th Rifle Company barracks. And the goal was not to hit the barracks, right? They didn't want to kill all of the Panamanians. They wanted to stun and confuse the occupants, so like a giant 2,000-pound flashbang to stun them into inaction. That was the point. That was the goal. Just before the Rangers of Task Force Red parachuted into the area. Okay, so upon reaching the target, the pilots of these F-117s encountered high winds coming from an unanticipated direction. The lead pilot swung to the left and dropped his payload only 60 yards away from the barracks that was supposed to be the near target of the pilot in the second aircraft. Keying on the first pilot, the second pilot dropped his bomb even further to the left, up to 300 yards away from the target that had originally been assigned to the lead pilot. Despite the error, the bombs exploded precisely where they were aimed, just not where they were meant to hit, and momentarily stunned the PDF troops occupying the barracks. Yeah, momentarily stunned them for like a minute, and then they went and defended the airport. So F-117 ended up being a Rockstar aircraft, and it's obviously alien technology, but anytime you have like the first use of something, you have to assume it's probably not going to go perfectly, right? I think there's a lesson there. So that's just the wave tops. That's, 4 or 5 of the objectives that happened night 1 of 27 that U.S. military went and took. A lot happened there in like a week. It went from flash to bang in like 5 days. Now, technically, it was longer than that, right? We had started doing serious planning about a year out, but from notification to hit was something like 5 days. And one of the reasons that went well was we still had, that good Cold War level of readiness. We still had a giant Cold War military on hand. One of the reasons it went well was we had forward bases, and because we had forward bases, for the most part, we had good intel, right? If you want to know what was happening at the airport, you just drive from your base over to the airport, take a picture of it, drive back. That's not always that easy, even now with modern technology, right? So what lessons can we take from this? If I were a planner for, say, Southcom now, what would I want to know? Well, I'd want to know that weather will kick your ass. Weather is a factor. So you need to know the weather, not just at your objective, you need to know the weather back at wherever you're staging from. So if you're staging aircraft from like the United States, you need to know the weather in the United States. You need to know the weather in transit, and you need to know the weather at the X, wherever the X is.
I think and I don't deal with weather in terms like the air ops planning, and this level of thing is a big deal. But I think kind of related to that discussion about weather and accounting for it is when you're willing to say, not right now. Like when do you call an abort? When do you put things off for weather? Like, and something that comes up a lot for us is like, sometimes you have to be patient. And that's really hard sometimes if you've been chasing this guy or you're really after this objective. And at some point you're just like, let's just fucking go. Like there comes a point where it's like, I know we all want to go, but like something like that in this complex of a problem, like there comes a point that you have to have a clear sense of like, when are you going to make that like hasty choice of like, we're going to do it anyway versus when do you be patient and disciplined?
That's a great point. And it's a much easier decision when you're working unilaterally in a small team.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Yeah.
It's not right. I'm not getting the vibe. Let's back off. It's another thing when you have a dozen task forces all trying to synchronize into an H hour, and you don't want to be the guy who's like, hey guys, I'm not getting a good feeling about the weather back in North Carolina. Except in this case, the weather in North Carolina was affecting the delivery of 2,782nd Airborne troops.
Might need those guys.
Right.
But this is, and again, not at the same level, 100% not. I cannot relate at that level. I get it, but we deal with it. This is a real thing that we deal with. I want to go back to those internal and external factors, right? The units that you're in a task force or group of task forces in that operational planning, there are things that you can iron out in the discussions ahead of time to understand if you are supporting or you are the supported force, because this happens frequently where our surveillance guys are like, hey, yeah, that's him. Go get him. And we're like, hold on, not yet. And they get frustrated. And there's like a little bit of empathy and communication and all those things that have to go back and forth about like, hey, I know that's your guy and you want us to go get him. And then you go to like, we'll speak to the air support side of it. You know, hey, we use frequently the local county here, we use their airplane a lot for surveillance operations, and they're awesome. They're very, very helpful to us. And sometimes they're up and available, and sometimes they're not. And there are times where I'm like, hey, if that's the move, if this is the move that we're going to make in this fashion or this manner, I'd really rather have the airplane up. And at times they're like, yeah, we're available. We're at the hangar. We're watching the weather. And literally this happened, what's today? This happened 3 nights ago to me. To my team. We were out on an operation looking for a homicide suspect, and there was a thing that we were going to do, and the airplane was available at the hangar, and we're like, all right, if that's the move that the surveillance, because it's their investigation, it's their thing, right? And we're there to support them and be the closer, and they wanted us to do X, and like, hey, if that's the play, that's fine, but I'd rather have the airplane up for it. And these are the things that we can all communicate and try to sort out and have those things ironed out, again, within our control. Because to Jim's point earlier, once you're on the ground and it goes loud, now shit just has to, now you're reactive, right?
We're doing it live.
Yeah. And so like anything that goes into the planning that you can iron out those kinks ahead of time, I think is incredibly helpful. And a lot of that's relationship building. Like we've done we've gone out of our way to build relationships with the units that we often support, but every once in a while someone calls us that we don't normally support, and we have to kind of start from square one on that.
Yeah. Next is intelligence preparation. Now, good intel usually takes time to develop and analyze, right? You got to get a spy satellite overhead. You got to hire a source. You got to install technical means to do the things. It's really hard to do that inside of 5 days. Like even now, it's really hard to get good intel quickly, right? But that's the challenge. That's what we need from the intelligence community is crash intelligence. And that's a different problem set. We need the types of people who can do that quickly, or we need to have widespread, general, good intel collect over a wide area. That doesn't always get you what you want, but at some point, as soon as you figure out, like, hey, this Noriega guy's got to go, someone needs to be assigned to know where he is right now, right? And like that's a dedicated team at some point. And the reason for that is if you don't have a find and a fix, there is no finish. I'm going to say that again because it's really goddamn important. If you don't have a find and a fix, there is no finish.
Yeah, I want to jump in on this because I mentioned the find, fix, finish thing earlier, and a theme in this particular event was that Jim mentioned the flash to bang being 5 days, like a short turnaround time. And another episode that we did recently where I interviewed Jim, one of the things that we talked about was the hurry up and wait philosophy, but in special operations forces, it's often wait. Okay, now hurry up and go. On my SWAT team, historically, our bread and butter back in the day was high risk search warrants. And we'd be given a target. Hey, we're going to go hit this house at this time, and everything was on our terms. We did very detailed. We went and scouted the location, a whole bunch of planning. I mean, everyone had very clearly assigned and delineated tasks. Like everything was very like detailed, right? And as time moved on, we moved more into this manhunting role where we're going after the baddest of the bad guys in our community. And it's kind of a similar game where there's a lot of time spent waiting around for surveillance to find their guy. And then once they find him, they're like, okay, go get him. We're the closer, right? And so that takes different shapes. I mean, we have there's all kinds of little tactics that we can, sometimes that's surround him in his apartment or his house. Sometimes that's get him on a traffic stop or open air. We have options for that, right? But without getting into the weeds, the essence is it changed the landscape for what our operational planning looked like. In the find, fix, finish formula, right? We had to become a lot more adaptable. And I think it's important on the intelligence side of things, if you're looking at, let's say, because like Jim said, it takes time to build that, right? Looking at patterns of life and what elements of predictability do we have in a target, right? The adaptability for us has become a thing where we get a briefing and it's like, hey, this is our target for today. We don't know what the finish is going to look like. We have to be able to, like, this is the background. This is what's going to inform our decision making. These are the things that are on the table and not on the table. And then we go out and we do SWAT shit. And we don't know exactly how that's going to go, but everyone is expected to be dynamic and flexible and to plug in a hole wherever there's work, right? Find work. We've talked about that before. And that in and of itself is its own kind of skill set, that flexibility, like adaptability, agility component of things. And it's something that you have to like rehearse and you have to practice and you have to learn through experience. But it's also led us to work a lot more lean, like lower manpower sometimes, more equipment maybe in some ways, but we've got to be able to be lean and to move quickly. And I think like going back to what we said about integrating with supporting forces and supported forces and all of that, the intel and the planning, it's got to account for all of it, right? Everyone has to understand the level of adaptability and flexibility required for an operation. And I think something like this is good. I mean, the change of course between we're going to blow up his plane or we're going to go snip the cable on something, right? Like, all right, the mission's changed. How do we adapt to that? Like, again, we have to iron that stuff out ahead of time as much as we can. And each unit involved in that needs to be able to learn how to be flexible and adaptable.
So next lesson is that even on a quote-unquote low-threat target like Panama, which isn't exactly Russia or China or Iran, right, you can get some casualties. Now, there are a couple things to think about with this. One is the decision to use stealth fighters in Panama. Remember, in 1989, these things were some of the most secretive things in the world. We weren't sure we wanted to acknowledge them at that point. We were keeping them in reserve in case we needed to go drop Russia, right? There was serious debate about whether to use them in Panama because you didn't really need them. But one, we wanted to do a shakeout. Two, we wanted to protect the troops. That was a serious part of the discussion was, hey, the Joint Force Commander asked for it, send it. And they did. To their credit, they're like, yeah, fine, we'll take the risk. We'll send the exquisite asset. But there's an exposure risk there. And also, because it was exquisite and because it was new, I think, it didn't work exactly the way we thought it would. Well, I'd rather learn that in Panama than Moscow. Yeah. Right? So there might be some value in sending stuff out that isn't fully operationally vetted sometimes, but that's a tricky risk decision, right? The other side of that is even a place like Panama, you're going to get casualties. That is part of combat. And even the Afghans running around in jammies with AKs and flip-flops were able to kill quite a few Americans. So you have to be prepared for that. And if you're going to do an airborne operation, a number of your guys are going to get hurt on the jump. The Army knows that, but I don't know that the entire Joint Force really appreciates that. You're going to get a bunch of guys hurt on the jump, especially a true combat jump. So that's next thing. Next, civilians have a way of just showing up at the worst possible time in the worst possible place. They will appear. At Desert One, an empty desert landing site that the CIA had been watching for a year, and nobody ever drives through here. There were 2 buses and a smuggling truck drove through as they were landing, right? Shit happens.
Yeah, not only does the enemy get a vote, but the environment gets a vote. This goes back to that, those other people that you're working with get a vote, the air assets and everything else. It goes back to those internal and external factors.
Next lesson, if there are helicopters in play, you have to plan for at least one of those helicopters to crash.
See the Osama bin Laden raid.
Yep, and I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I've been around too many of them to not plan that into the plan, right? Next, when you shift the goals during execution, you bringing risk. And anytime you have unclear commander's intent, you're bringing risk. Clear guidance and keeping the mission until you have to change it buys down risk. Okay. Next lesson. Air power makes up for a lot of errors. When you're doing it live, it helps to have, the dragon from Game of Thrones over you, helping you out with the gunship or the Apaches or the little birds, right? But it doesn't fix everything. And
especially
one of the
if the weather sucks.
Yeah, and one of the things in close air support is I can avenge you, but I can't necessarily protect you, right? I can stop the second missile, but I'm probably not going to stop the first one, okay? Next, it helps if you're already forward. Remember, we had a number of bases physically in Panama when all this started, so most of the infill was okay, guys, get in the trucks and drive off the base. There's a time value of action. And I'm huge on this time value of action, that if you're flying around the world to get there, you've already lost at least a day, probably closer to 3, to get around the world. So having a forward presence buys down a lot of risk and speeds up your OODA loop, your action options. So I think that's all I got. A lot happened in Panama. If you get a chance, read a book on it, read a couple of books on it, watch a Discovery Channel show about it, do something, because I think there are good lessons to take from this. And, similarly, there are lessons to take from Haiti, both times we went, Grenada. The Brits fought a war with Argentina back in the 80s, the Falklands War. The Argentines call it the Malvinas War. There are probably some good lessons there. And if we're not learning from that, we're giving up our opportunities to not have to make the same mistake twice, right? So, like I said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does tend to rhyme. So might be a good time to dust all that off if we're going to talk seriously about turning up the heat in the drug war.
Foot stomp.
Yeah. All right, be safe out there. Be smart out there. Hasta la vista.
All All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show. So when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters. That's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can have our Patreon. Give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.